There are stories you hear, and then there are stories you feel. Bootsy Collins never told us with a quiet voice. Even now, at 73, he says it without blinking. 75% business, 25% music. And the business almost swallowed him whole. Before the star-shaped glasses, before the cosmic jackets, and the bass lines that bent reality, he was just a kid from Cincinnati trying to outrun the rent. A boy whose mother called him Bootsy because she liked the sound of it. A boy who learned early that you can love music with your whole soul and still lose everything to the world around it. But fame has a way of choosing its price. Bootsy paid in pieces. A father figure who threw him out on the streets after a single trip too far into LSD. Nights he cannot remember, lawsuits he never saw coming, friends who turned into enemies when credits disappeared. A restaurant that opened with cheers and closed with shame. A body that once moved like electricity, now slowing under the weight of years. Yet behind all of that, there is the part of the story the world rarely stops to see. The kid who drew every pair of glasses he ever wore. The young man who carried a bass like it was a promise. The artist who made funk legal when the world still thought the word was dirty. The human being who kept giving even while he was breaking. So the question is not how Bootsy became a legend. The question is how he survived long enough to tell the truth about what it cost him. If you are ready, we will walk together into the noise, the color, the chaos that built him. Before the lights and the noise, before the star-shaped bass guitars and the stage outfits that looked like they walked out of another universe, there was a small home in Cincinnati where a boy learned how to dream. His name was William Earl Collins, but nobody called him that. His mother looked at him, once freshly born, wrapped in a thin hospital blanket and said, "You look like a Bootsy." And that was that. A name rooted in love carried into legend. Life in the Collins home was simple but never easy. Rent was a monthly storm. Whenever the landlord came knocking, Bootsy and his family slipped out the back door and disappeared for a while. "Skippity-doo-dah day," he said years later, smiling at the memory. Those were the early lessons. How to survive, how to move, how to stay soft in a hard world. His older brother, Phelps Catfish Collins, became the anchor he leaned on. Catfish was steady, focused, a quiet fire burning. The two brothers formed a bond so tight it felt like rhythm and melody learning to breathe together. They played in small rooms lit by single lamps, the soft buzz of old wires filling the silence between notes. Nothing glamorous, just two kids building a language they did not yet know would change music. Bootsy drew things before he ever played them. Glasses, jackets, stage designs. Even as a child, his imagination had shape and color. If he had not become a musician, he might have become an artist. But the world had other plans. The drawings would come later. First, there was a need to make sound. He and Catfish formed their first band, the Pacemakers, with Frankie Cash Waddy on drums and singer Philippe Wynne. They were young, hungry, and raw. A group shaped by basements, back rooms, and the small neighborhood stages. Their sound was loud, messy, and beautiful. Cincinnati had heard funk before, but not like this. Not with this kind of electricity running through it. Then March of 1970 arrived, and fate did what fate often does. It opened a door without warning. James Brown, the hardest working man in show business, had just lost most of his band. Money issues, ego clashes, exhaustion. Whatever the reason, he needed new blood. Something sharp, something young, something fearless. He found the Pacemakers. Overnight, the boys from Cincinnati were reborn as the JBs. They walked into a world bigger than anything they had imagined. Bright suits, tight rehearsals, rules that were carved into stone. Brown demanded perfection and Bootsy delivered. But inside the discipline, inside the rigid timing, and the punishing expectations, another lesson was taking root. Music was not just rhythm, not just feeling, not just whim. It was also business. And the business was already preparing to eat him alive. When Bootsy Collins stepped into James Brown's world, and it felt like stepping into a furnace. The heat was constant, the expectations sharp. Every note had weight. Every mistake was a sin. Brown ran his band like a military unit dressed in velvet. Tight, precise. No mercy for anyone who slipped. Bootsy was only 21, but he walked in with a bass tone that cracked open the room. It wasn't polished yet. It wasn't controlled. but it had something Brown needed: fire. A new kind of rhythm, something unpredictable, something alive. Within months, the JBs carved their names into history. Get Up, Superbad, Soul Power, The Grunt. Songs that would echo through decades, sampled by rappers, studied by rock musicians, imitated, but never duplicated. Bootsy's lines sat in the center of it all, bending, time reshaping groove, filling the low end with shape and swagger no one had heard before. The kid from Cincinnati had made it to the front lines of American funk. But genius rarely stays still. Bootsy's imagination was bigger than the rules Brown lived by. James demanded stillness. Bootsy lived for motion. James demanded obedience. Bootsy felt music in colors, not commands. The tension grew like a crack spreading through glass. And then came the night that split everything open, the LSD show. Bootsy walked on stage seeing things no sober man could name. His bass turned into a snake. The lights breathed. The stage felt like water. He played anyway, somehow. And when the show ended, when Brown dragged him backstage expecting fear or apology, Bootsy laughed, a wild, unbreakable laugh born from youth drugs and exhaustion. That was the end. Brown threw him out. Bootsy didn't look back. The fall should have broken him, but instead it pushed him towards something even larger: George Clinton. If James Brown was the discipline of funk, George Clinton was the chaos. Parliament Funkadelic wasn't a band, it was a universe. A psychedelic cathedral built from guitars, smoke, sweat, and imagination. With Clinton, Bootsy didn't just play. He became Bootsy the character, Bootsilla, Casper the funky ghost, the cosmic outlaw of bass. He played lines that stretched across galaxies. He wore star-shaped glasses and suits that glowed under stage lights. He invented the space bass, an instrument that looked like it crawled out of a dream. Albums like America Eats Its Young Mothership Connection and Standing on the Verge reshaped black music. Bootsy was no longer the student. He was the engine. By the late 1970s, he had become a movement on his own. Bootsy's Rubber Band, Player of the Year, Bootsilla at #1. A star without needing radio approval or industry forgiveness. He wasn't just making funk. He was defining it. And the world danced unaware of the storm gathering just behind the stage lights. Fame never announces the moment it begins to turn on you. It doesn't shout, it doesn't warn, it just shifts quietly like a stage light losing power. One day the glow feels warm, the next day it burns. For Bootsy Collins, the decline didn't come in a single moment. It came in waves. Slow at first, then faster, then all at once. The freedom of Parliament Funkadelic was intoxicating. No rules, no boundaries, no one telling him what not to play or how not to be. The music felt like electricity running straight through his bones. But inside that freedom was a darker current. LSD drifted into his life, not as a threat but as an invitation. A way to stretch imagination, a way to stay awake when the world was too loud. A way to keep pace with a band that lived half in reality and half in some cosmic fever dream. What began as experimentation grew into dependence. 2 years of daily use. 2 years of slipping out of himself. 2 years where stages blurred into each other, nights dissolved, and mornings didn't always come. The arrest in Toronto should have stopped him. A night in jail with charges for mescaline possession. Cold walls, a metal bench. The kind of silence that forces a man to confront the parts of himself he tries hardest to outrun. But Bootsy walked out thinking he could still handle it. Thinking the music needed the chaos. Thinking he needed the madness to stay original. Meanwhile, the business world was sharpening its teeth. Hit songs brought money, but money brought arguments. Bootsilla, the track that crowned him, Player of the Year, sparked a storm behind closed doors. People who had stood beside him, written with him, toured with him, suddenly claimed he had stolen credit. Bootsy called it confusion. They called it betrayal. Then came the lawsuits over his signature bass designs. A star-shaped instrument meant to define him became the center of a legal battle over intellectual property and unpaid money. Companies accused him. He accused them. Production stopped. Dreams stalled. Reputation bruised. Bootsy tried to outrun the business side by building something new, a restaurant. Bootsy's, food, music, community, a place shaped in his image. But the legal problems rolled in faster than the customers. Zoning issues, licensing errors, paperwork that shouldn't have been ignored. 2 years later, the doors closed, not with applause, with embarrassment. And then in 1984 came the moment that nearly ended everything. A dirt bike, the woods, LSD still singing in his blood. A crash that flipped him through the air and slammed him into the earth so hard that doctors told him he may never play again. He lay in bed for months, broken in bone and spirit. The silence was different this time. Not punishment, not withdrawal, reflection. He realized the thing he loved had begun to devour him. Music hadn't ruined him. Business hadn't ruined him. Drugs hadn't ruined him. He had been slowly losing himself. And for the first time, he wanted himself back. When Bootsy finally stepped back from the chaos and the chemicals, the world he returned to was not the same one he had helped build. America had moved on, chasing new sounds, new stars, new distractions. But beneath the noise, the communities that understood him. Most black musicians, working class families, young artists trying to outrun their own demons watched his journey with a different kind of attention. To them, Bootsy wasn't just a funk legend. He was a mirror, a reminder of what the industry can take when it decides you're no longer necessary. Black America knew the story too well. Gifted men rising from nothing, carrying whole genres on their backs, only to be broken by contracts, credit theft, in a business built to profit from their labor while ignoring their pain. Bootsy's fall wasn't shocking, it was familiar. And yet his return, sober, reflective, grounded, felt like a victory for everyone who loved him. He didn't hide his scars. He didn't rewrite the past to make himself look cleaner. He spoke openly about the LSD, the crash, the lawsuits, the embarrassment of losing a restaurant with his name on the door. America respects talent, but it reveres honesty. Around the world, musicians responded with something closer to reverence. Rock players studied his swagger. Rap artists borrowed his lines. Electronic producers lifted pieces of his bass tone to build new landscapes. Young bassists treated him like scripture. Flea called him a blueprint. Les Claypool called him a North Star. Victor Wooten called him a teacher. Bootsy's fingerprints were everywhere, on records that reached millions, on stages he never stepped onto, in genres that didn't even exist when he first picked up a bass. Even in television and film, his presence became a kind of cultural shorthand, a signal for freedom, for courage, for eccentric black brilliance that refused to shrink or apologize. And then came the funk not fight movement, a simple idea born from an old musician who had seen too much blood on American streets. Bring peace through rhythm, teach kids to dance instead of destroy, use funk as a bridge instead of a weapon. Crowds showed up, mothers cried, young boys listened, cities welcomed him. Because everyone understood what Bootsy had become, a survivor who still believed the world could be better than the one he had grown up in. In the quiet moments when the stage lights are gone and the crowd has dissolved into memory, a man finally meets the truth of his own story. Bootsy Collins spent a lifetime stitching together sound, color, and imagination until they formed something the world had never seen before. But behind the cosmic suits, behind the star-shaped bass, behind the jokes and the characters, there was always a man trying to hold himself together while everything around him was pulling him apart. Some stories end with applause. His rarely did. Most ended in hospital rooms and courtrooms, in long silences at home, where he had to choose between becoming the myth or saving the man underneath it. But dignity never needed permission. It never needed fame. It never needed the world to understand. Bootsy found his in the slow climb back to himself, in the quiet rehab after the crash, in the steady voice of Patty Collins reminding him he was worth saving, in the decision to teach instead of perform, to guide instead of chase, to build Funk University, to build funk, not fight, to tell the next generation that their life is bigger than the mistakes they haven't made yet. He once said the business almost ate him alive, but it didn't. Because somewhere beneath the chaos, he kept one piece of himself untouched. The part that believed music could heal, the part that still believed in joy. And that is the piece the world remembers. To the young musicians who feel lost in contracts they barely understand. To the old players who never received credit for the grooves they carried. To the kids who grow up ducking bullets and broken promises. There is something in Bootsy's story for you too. Some stories end without closure. But a man's worth is not measured by how neatly his life unfolds. It is measured by what he leaves in the hearts of others. Bootsy left rhythm, he left color, He left courage. And he left a map showing how to fall apart and stand up again without losing the soul of who you are. If this story touched you, share it. Someone out there needs to remember that survival is also a kind of genius.